Welcome to my presentation on a pricing model to assess price of expensive drugs with an orphan indication. My name is Nuijten of A2M. First, I start with the rationale of the pricing model. We all know the criteria for reimbursement, safety, efficacy, but also cost effectiveness, the cost per quality, and of course, budget impact. For orphan drugs, there are some specific differences with normal drugs. First of all, already efficacy. Clinical evidence may vary because usually lower sample size in the clinical trials, heterogeneity of the symptoms, including multiple domains of the human body, and also relevance of clinical outcomes is often questioned. So what is the relevance of a 100-meter test? Cost effectiveness, because of the high drug price, usually by far exceeding the threshold, for instance, 100,000 euros per quality. And the ICEs can be up to 1 million in rare cases. Budget impact is of course per patient quite high. On national level it can be moderate because rare diseases, so not so many patients. And finally, equity social values can be incorporated depending on the country. The prices of the orphan drugs are quite high. And that's because of two reasons. First, the most important are the small number of potential patients. So the fixed cost of R&D, but also operational costs after launch have to be distributed over a very small number of patients. And by that, the price has to be much higher than for other drugs. And in addition, there's also a high risk for the investor. One of the reasons clinical evidence leads to more uncertainty in final clinical outcomes and registration and reimbursement decisions. Secondly, there is more and more, because of the high cost per quality, more delay in reimbursement decisions, leading to price negotiations, which often lead to huge discounts. And finally, orphan drugs are often developed by small formed biotech companies, so you have to incorporate small firm premium. So this is the reimbursement market, a national market where you have the patients, the payers, the providers, and the government. And here we have to, here the cost per quality and budget impact are used, but we also have the free international market where the investors are investing in R&D projects of medical innovation, and cash is king. So the investor's perspective is very important, and that is what we try to incorporate in our pricing model. So first of all, why do we need to incorporate the free market? First of all, governments leave innovation to business entrepreneurship. So therefore, medical innovation relies on market mechanisms in the financial market. And there we have to deal with investors who demand the required return of investment, which in the end determines the price. And that depends on the cash flows and the cost of capital, which we explain in more detail in this slide. So the pricing model is based on the discounted cash flow method, which is based on the free cash flows and the cost of capital. The free cash flows consist on the sales from the pharmaceuticals after launch, so many years after the initial investment. And secondly, the cost for R&D, R&D cost for phase 1, 2, 3, and of course also marketing costs. And the cost of capital reflects the opportunity cost of making a specific investment, and that's the required return on investment for the investor. We also incorporate failures of clinical program because not all products will reach registration. Some may fall after phase 1, some may fall after phase 3. And we also incorporate the risk of market access, so the probability of reimbursement. And we have more and more, we have to, the investor has to incorporate in his analysis business models like conditional reimbursement, pay for performance, which all has an impact on future sales, but also future costs for the company. We apply the model to Spinraza. We also had an application in oncology, orphan drug, but we focus today on Spinraza, which is a drug for SMA. As you can see, a very low prevalence, and it's added to best supportive care. So it means there are actually no real treatments for this disease. So there's certainly a clinical value of Spinraza, which was acknowledged by the the Dutch NICE, so the Zorg Institute. They approved the clinical benefit, but the annual cost 240,000. Most important, the ISA was 1.7 million per QALY, and also the budget impact was quite high, but the ISA was the reason for price negotiations. So governments calculated the break-even price when the ISA would be 80,000 euros per QALY, which is the Dutch upper threshold. And then they came to a price of 36,000 euro instead of the 240,000, which is the actual price. If we put this 36,000 in our pricing model, the net present value becomes much smaller than zero, so there is a loss. So conclusion, 85% reduction in price is not justified from the investor perspective. So in this slide, I show you the basic input of the pricing model, which are the costs of development for phase 1, 3, and also 4. We incorporate the population size, which is based on the Western markets for pharmaceutical companies. We did a scenario on a larger global market. So the key markets are the Western markets. And we incorporated a period of reimbursement of 1 year after registration. So we end up with net patent life years of 12. The uptake is 80% from year 1, because in this case, there is no real treatment, it's only best supportive care. And we incorporated probabilities of failure based on international data. And the cost of capital is 12%, which is the specific cost of capital for biotech companies. For pharmaceuticals, it's 9%. So this is show the results. A summary, actual price 240, the break-even price for the investor based on the model becomes 114,000, and based on the discount of 36,000. But this break-even price of 114 does not include all other monetary and non-monetary values for society. And secondly, it's based on general data, so not specific data for orphan diseases. So the first step is that we made an adjustment for orphan diseases, because Spinraza is a first-in-class. So there's also many years since there has been R&D clinical trials in this disease. So therefore, R&D costs are much higher because there's not an existing engine for performing trials. And related to that, we estimated also a higher failure rate of the clinical trials between the various stages. And we increase, there's also more risk because it's a first-in-class drug, and therefore more risk for the investor. So we increased from 12 to 18%. And in a second step, we incorporated the so-called innovation premium, which is relevant because it's a first-in-class drug. So you should reward innovation. Substitution effects were incorporated by a reduction in costs in other fields. And we incorporated again in QALYs. We transferred it in a kind of intangible asset by saying the cost per QALY is, the threshold is 80,000. So if there is a gain in 2 QALYs, we end up with, in fact, with a monetary value of 160,000, which is a benefit for society. This table summarizes the results. Costs were discounted at 4% and QALYs at 1.5, which is the Dutch guideline for QALYs. So based on that, we see that the price, actual price is 240,000. The average drug price based on the initial analysis before adjusted was a bit more than 114. If we fine-tune based on the fine-tuning for orphan drugs of the costs and the failures, we end up a bit higher of 143,000 plus. Then we incorporate innovation premium, which consists of 2 parts, the cost substitution and the gain in QALYs, and then we end up with a total of 222 plus thousand for the price of Spinraza, which compares to 240,000, so 20,000 less. At the right side, you see a different calculation where we only take a difference in QALY discounting. Here we take the cost of 4% equal to cost, because in fact you can say you transfer it to monetary value. So why do you not take the 4%? In the end, you see only a small impact. The overall cost, the break-even price becomes now 215,000 instead of the 202,000 with the 1.5 discounting. In this slide, you see graphical display going from the left to the right, you see the average drug price based on the general information. Then we incorporate the fine-tuning of trials, failures, and costs. We incorporate the premium, innovation premium based on cost savings and quality gains. And then we end up with the total price, which is the 222, which is a bit lower than the actual drug price. So based on the concept, in this case, the price of Spinraza seems justified if we incorporate the innovation premium. So we can conclude that the pricing model is very useful in case the ICER of a drug, of an orphan drug, is much higher than the 80,000 per quality to justify the existing price. And we show also why the price in orphan drugs are much higher because of the lower sample size. It may also be relevant at an international level as Netherlands, Belgium, Austria are considering joining price negotiations. It may also be useful in countries where the cost per quality is not an official criterion, like Germany, where of course the budget impact is also an issue. In those countries also, the pricing model may be able to show you the appropriateness of a price. And therefore I would end my presentation and thank you for your attention. If you have any further questions on this topic, please do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much.